better than two.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Sweet Home Catoosa. I'm your host, Richard Tharpe, and today, and Marc, I'm going to read a little bit from this because I don't want to mess this up. Today, we've got the pleasure of having Marcus Veazey with us here today. He's a retired FBI special agent with over 30 years' experience tackling complex cases across organized crime, fraud, and community-based law enforcement initiatives. Your background is in government and corporate investigations, and that's made you the go-to expert on issues impacting our community. Thank you. And one of the other things, we're going to throw this in because this is a big deal for me as well. You're a fellow podcaster. So Marcus has his stories and insights through his podcast. His podcast, which he'll talk about today, is called Just One More Question, where he brings listeners into the heart of criminal investigations and crime education. And so, welcome.
Thanks. I appreciate the opportunity. And I love podcasts. I love doing it and love listening to other people. So thank you very much for having me on.
Yeah, it's great. Well, you know, in our area, it's always neat to run into folks like yourself here in Northwest Georgia that are running podcasts. But more importantly, I mean, heck, you've had a pretty big impact through your law enforcement career, I guess you could say, too, to talk about things. Yeah. So we'll let you start it out today.
Sure, I mean, absolutely. So background on me. I grew up in Lawrenceville, Georgia, but all my relatives are from this area. My dad went to Rossville High School, was an All-American football player from there in the 50s, went on to play both football and baseball at Georgia Tech when Georgia Tech was in the SEC. And my mom grew up in around Fort Oglethorpe, and so all my relatives are in this area, but I didn't grow up here, grew up in Lawrenceville. But we knew that we wanted to come here when we were retiring. We had come back here and visited many, many times. I knew I wanted to have my youngest at Gordon Lee and wanted to live in Chickamauga. I loved the battlefield and loved the history, and so that's what we did. So at the end of our career, most of our career was in Washington, D.C., but we were all over. I spent time in New Orleans, in Washington, Omaha, Nebraska. I was overseas in the United Arab Emirates. I was representing the FBI in the Middle East there. And then we came back to the Atlanta division. At that time, we had what's called a resident agency. It's a small office in Rossville. And I said, I'll take it.
Yeah.
And so we did, and we came back, and we've been here now 17 years total. The last 6 of my bureau career was there, and then with Unum Insurance Company as Director of Corporate Investigations. We love this area, absolutely love this area, wouldn't go anywhere else. It's actually the longest we've lived anywhere. So my wife and I, we've been married almost 42 years, and we just have grown to love this area, and all my children live here now, and so it's good to go. With the Bureau, we got to do all kinds of things. I was very blessed to work organized crime, public corruption in New Orleans, where it thrives. and then I was a supervisor and a senior executive with the Bureau in Washington, and then was number 2 for the Omaha division. We covered both the states of Iowa and Nebraska, and then back to Atlanta and got to work a lot of different cases. I was FBI's representative on the Therese Parker case. If you remember that case, that was a great case to work, horrible circumstances, but a great case to work. So I've been very blessed to work some really interesting cases and had a wonderful career. Loved the Bureau, but it was time to retire. It's a young man's game, and then on to corporate. And then I was with the Walker County Sheriff's Office for 3.5 years. I handled the evidence room and whatever the Major Freeman wanted me to do. And now I work for the Lookout Mountain Judicial Circuit in their what are called the accountability courts. I help with that program, Judge Don Thompson, Judge Chris Arndt, Judge Graham, in whatever they need me to do as well. So, I've had my hand in this game for about 36 years now. So,
wow.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. This area is really interesting. We've got one of the things that I've seen traditionally is we have a real bad drug problem. And we have it in Catoosa County. We have it in Walker County, Chattooga, Dade. And it's just, it's just overrunning us. It really is. And I'm sure you have seen the devastation of it through your work. But for us, what we see now is just an influx of things that I never saw when I was in law enforcement. When I was in Washington, I ran an international drug squad, and all we saw was crack cocaine. And that was in the 90s. And we saw turf battles between gangs over crack. And then when I went to Omaha, all we saw was meth. I'd never seen meth before. Never saw it in New Orleans, never saw it in Washington. I get out there, that's all there was. In Nebraska, it came in from Mexico up through Omaha, which is a way station into Chicago. In Iowa, it was all homegrown, all homemade.
Isn't that amazing?
It's very different. It was very strange. Now, what you see is the drug fentanyl.
Yes.
Is taking over. I had never come in contact with it until I got with the sheriff's office. And it is the most insidious drug that I've ever come across.
Well, yeah. So, and you and I are similar age. So you remember growing up, you heard about marijuana, cocaine, right? You heard about cocaine and heroin. Those are the big ones you'd hear about. And then all of a sudden, crack came along. Yeah. And crack came along, and it was a cheaper way for folks to become addicted and users, right? Where you always heard about cocaine. Well, you had to have a lot of money, they'd say. It's the upper class, they said, that would pour through there. But all of a sudden, crack became easy for everybody, and it just tore families apart and communities apart. And so then, yes, all of a sudden, here comes the next evolution of it, and meth. Yeah. And, I had never heard of meth. And, until I got up in this area and over there in South Pittsburgh and Marion County, they're like, oh, it's, somebody said that's the meth capital of the world. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but I'm just saying that it was huge, right? And, if you're not into that or notice, you just don't understand how it tears folks apart. But then when you start noticing things, and crime always goes up, things go missing, people are stealing things to try to support their habit. Yep. And then here we go with fentanyl. And fentanyl's so scary because it's killing them. And to me, I'm like, why would you want to kill your customers if you're drug dealers? But I mean, it's just so addictive, and they lace everything now, I'm hearing. So, they're just putting it across the board. So it's just scary how it's evolved.
It is. It's extremely cheap. And the effects of it are extremely strong. Fentanyl is a drug that's used for extreme cancer patients in pain. It is not meant to be a recreational drug, but that's what it's become. And it's not only is it highly addictive, it's very dangerous because there are different recipes that people, it's not regulated at all. And so you really don't know what you're buying. And so one thing that you've been using maybe at one strength, and all of a sudden you're using the same amount, it's a different strength. And we run into overdoses on a regular basis. And when I was with the sheriff's office, we would have ODs in the jail.
Wow.
As the inmates would smuggle in, and get it into the system. And what you have there is you have an inmate who's been clean, say, for 6 months, 8 months. And all of a sudden they get in contact with fentanyl. And they use the same amount that they were using when they're out on the streets. And there they are. And we are rushing to it and, hitting them with Narcan. And it's very scary. But one of the scariest things with fentanyl today is it's being laced with a drug called xylazine. Now, xylazine is a large animal tranquilizer. Okay, it's meant for elephants, giraffe in the zoo populations. And so what drug dealers are doing now is they're lacing fentanyl with xylazine. And we haven't seen it a whole ton here, but it's coming. Started in Philadelphia, and it infiltrated into the heroin supply. And about 90% of the heroin supply now in Philadelphia is infiltrated with xylazine. And what xylazine does is it takes the high of fentanyl that lasts maybe, say, 45 minutes and will extend it out to like 10 or 12 hours.
Oh, wow.
So, but it's got some significant drawbacks. Two, one, what it does is it attacks the nervous system in the cerebral cortex, and it causes the skull to droop because the neck doesn't have the nervous system impulses anymore. And so what you see are individuals with their head like this, and it's called the zombie drug in Philadelphia. Now you can imagine the difficulty. You have someone that's in that state for an extended period of time, how vulnerable they would be. Okay, then the next thing that happens with xylazine is it causes sores on the body, especially the extremities. And those sores get infected, and then you get amputations. And it's a horrible thing to see. But that's what they're lacing this with. And then what we're finding is xylazine and fentanyl both are being laced into meth and laced into marijuana and laced in. So, one of the things that we try to tell drug addicts is this: you do not know what you're taking. You may think you know,
right,
but you don't. And the dangers are just unbelievable. And the addiction rate is so high. With meth, what meth actually does is it changes the chemistry of the brain to where you have what are called pleasure centers in your brain. So you see a sunrise, you hear a baby coo, you hear a dog bark, whatever gives you pleasure. And that evokes dopamine in your brain that makes you go, I like that. What meth does is insidious, is it shuts down those centers so that the only pleasure that a drug addict on meth gets is from meth. Everything else you no longer get pleasure from. It's just gray is the way it sounds,
Wow.
when an addict talks to you. So, it's hard to watch the destruction physically, mentally, emotionally, what it does to families. It's just a very difficult thing. And my heart goes out to these folks. And so I've really gotten into helping them. I ran a jail ministry for 3.5 years with Walker County. I would preach in the jail every Friday night in the trustee dorm, and those were my guys. And so for 3.5 years, every Friday night, I was in there bringing the gospel, and I would do for the general population as well. So through that, I developed a heart for that. And I'll tell you this, from a law enforcement standpoint, I never in my wildest dreams thought that I would be behind bars preaching to inmates. That is not something now I taught Sunday school for 26 years. But boy, I tell you what, that was one of the best times I ever had. I had my spot and I had my guys, and every Friday night we were in there bringing it. So I was very lucky and very blessed to be able to do that.
Yeah, it's and that's an amazing thing. And I think as we get older, I know with me, you find yourself doing things that you never thought you would be doing,
Yeah.
right? Because opportunity presents itself, and you just like, hey, I think that fits, and here we go.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's a fight every day in our communities. It is.
And you see it in your position in government, where we're always struggling for grants. We're always struggling for more funding. The three things for individuals who are coming out of jail, the three most difficult things are: 1, housing; 2, transportation; 3, what we call administrative. Trying to get their driver's license back, trying to get their birth certificate. Because what happens when they go in, all their stuff gets stolen. When they come out,
Right.
they don't have any of that. And so you say, well, you need to get a job. Well, in today's market, to get a job, you have to have a cell phone, because that's how their employers get back to you. All applications are online. So it's those kind of things that we have run into that our ministry was called New Road Ministries would try and help the individuals with housing, transportation, and with the administrative things. And it just opened my eyes to how government can impact into those ways. And it's usually through grants. We get state grants, we get federal grants. But it's really the involvement and the engagement with our government officials who see the need for that. We have we're losing an entire generation.
Oh, we are.
We are losing an entire generation. And there are some people that say, well, they're bringing it on themselves. Yep, I understand that. But you know what? Drug addiction, what I've seen is generational. You'll have we've had grandmother, daughter, and granddaughter in jail all at the same time.
Wow.
Yeah. And so we have just a plague, what I'll say a plague of that in our county regions here with Catoosa and Walker, Dade, and Chattooga. And it's just heartbreaking. It's something that really has melted my heart to it. never thought I would be doing that.
Sure. You know, what us growing up, we all made mistakes like you're talking about. For us, we'd make mistakes, and it was things that you just learn from and move on. It wasn't, just absolute the end of the road type, it's real hard to get out of.
Yeah.
I saw an analogy the other day, and they said, and I showed my son, he's 24 now, and I said, and this is true in life, it's a steep hill in life when you're trying to make your way in life, right? It's not easy, and you're going up an incline almost, right? And so if you go up and you're trying to put forth things to try to get your life stable and do things that make your life a little better than the day before, but it's a climb.
Yes.
But they say if you make really bad decisions, and it's true, you go down almost in a pit, right? Because you've made these bad decisions. Now to get back to where you would have been here is 100 times harder.
It is.
And so that's the thing you try to get folks to understand is, don't put yourself at such a disadvantage that you make it almost too hard to get out of. And I think that's where they give up. They're like, I've just gotten myself in too deep. I can't get out.
Yes.
And so there's just easier to give up. And that's what we don't want folks to do. And so, in government, we've got, I know at the commission meeting, they were talking just a few weeks ago, the opioid settlements came in.
Yep.
And so here in Catoosa County, they were talking about ways to use those funds. And one of them was transportation.
Yep.
Because they said, hey, we've got to get these folks that want to go through these programs down to Lafayette and these areas, right, to get them the help they need. And they don't have transportation.
That's right.
So Catoosa said, hey, we're going to earmark money to do that with, right? And I think that's a great thing. And I know Sheriff Sisk here in Catoosa County is working on an expansion at the jail.
He is.
Work release. And here again, another avenue for folks to say, hey, instead of I'm in this deep hole, it's like we can get you to work release. You can go out and make money to pay your fines and do the things. Because when you're in jail, if you've got a family, your income's gone.
Yep.
And it's devastating to families. So
it is. What we've seen, or what I've seen, is the effect that these types of things have on young kids. And I want to talk just a minute about that, if I could. One of the things that I do is I go and I make visits with what we call our participants. I make sure that they're home on curfew, make sure they're doing the right things, make sure there's nothing in the house that shouldn't be there. But through those encounters, what I run into are the children. And so I see these kids who are coming from these homes and coming from these backgrounds, who are having to live in situations that are very, very difficult. Sometimes they've been taken away by the court, then they come back, then they go away, they come back. And so I was thinking the other day how wonderful it would be if we had a Boys and Girls Club in Lafayette, in Walker County.
Wow.
And let me tell you why I say that. When we were in Omaha, my wife and I and my family, we lived in Blair, Nebraska. So Blair, Nebraska, small town, about 7,000 people. It's about 20 miles north of Omaha, but it is like the perfect place to live. In that town was a member of the Hunt family that owns Kansas City Chiefs, Hunt Oil.
Correct.
Okay. He came in and he poured more money into that community than you can imagine. He poured money into Blair High School. It had that was the best high school. It had a drama program. He loved the arts, and man, they had it. But the thing he did was he built a YMCA. It was the largest, most beautiful YMCA I'd ever seen in my life. And that community thrived, and kids had a place to go after school. So what I see when I go and do all these visits is I see these kids roaming the streets, getting into trouble. 10, 11, 12 years old, they're already starting to use drugs. And it's just, we need a safe haven for those children so that we don't lose that generation.
Correct.
Can you imagine the difference we would make in a child's life if they had a place to go after school that was safe, they could do their homework, they could do something, arts if they wanted, sports if they wanted, whatever it was, maybe even get a meal. Because some of these kids, the only meal they're getting is at school.
Yeah.
They're not getting anything at home. What a great thing that would be if we had something like that. So now that's become one of the things that I'm interested in doing. So, from a government standpoint, grant standpoint, those are things that I'm interested in.
Yeah, that's great. You know, and I've had folks here. I've had Tina Pinkston with Lyft on the show.
Yeah.
And so she has the one here in Ringgold, and the kids go after school, and it's great. And they're in the process of opening the one down in Fort Oglethorpe.
Yep.
And I know she's shown interest about going over to Walker County.
Yes.
And you have the link at the Y. So we've got some opportunities, but not as many as we've got school kids in all the areas, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because you're right. When they get out of school, a lot of them, you know, a place to go and do the things that you described is huge, right?
Yes.
Because, you know, a lot of them, home life isn't the best place.
Yeah.
And we talk about that as well, you know, with food. You know, a lot of times they eat, that's the best meal they have all day is what they have at school.
Exactly.
And they go home on the weekends and they have no food, you know, and it's hard for some of us to fathom. It's like, really, is that happening? But it is.
Yes, it is.
So.
Yes, it is. I've been in these homes, and I can tell you that there may be one can of soup for 4 people, and that's all they have. And so what we do is we have, well, the probation office has a food pantry, so we direct them there. We engage with other churches to be able to do that. My son, I'll give him a shout out. Bless his heart, he's a pastor at Westside Baptist Church in Lakeview. He just came there. He's been there since Father's Day. He was pastor up in North Carolina and graduated from Criswell College in Dallas, Texas. He's a great pastor. I love him. And what they do is they partner with Westside Elementary School to do just this. We've got more food in our kitchen right now, getting ready for Thanksgiving, to go out into the community and make sure that these kids and these families have food. Because, you know, while I did not grow up with a silver spoon at all, I never went hungry. And so I don't know what that's like. But there are a lot of people in our communities that do.
Yes.
So we try our best to help in that respect. And that's an engagement between private institutions and with public institutions as well. There's a lot of things that we can do, and there's a lot of people that need that help.
They do.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah. And I didn't mean to get on a soapbox about that, but it's near.
Listen, those are things we need to talk about in our communities. I mean, listen, it's so huge, and like you said, a lot of us can't necessarily understand because we didn't grow up that way.
Right.
You know, I grew up in a middle class family, and so you know, I had food when I came home from school.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's one of the things I always remember in my kids growing up. They'd eat you out of house and home when they come home from school, right?
Yes,
and,
mine too.
You know, but we just take it for granted we have that opportunity, and a lot of kids don't.
Yeah, they don't.
And so sending those things home with the kids is huge, not just on the weekends, but during the weekday too. Yeah. So, you know, there's a lot of agencies like you're talking about with your son that are really trying to fill those holes.
Absolutely.
But there's not enough yet to fill all the holes.
Yeah.
And so we've definitely got to keep plugging away on that.
We do.
So let's jump back off here for a second.
Sure.
Because you've got a podcast.
I do.
And so, you know, let's talk about that for a second.
Absolutely.
Just one more question. So how did that come about?
Sure. So Just One More Question is a true crime podcast, but it's not what a lot of true crime podcasts are. What we do is we have authors on and to talk about their books and the stories that make up their books. And so I'm an avid reader, always have been. I got the reading bug when I was 10 years old. My mother bought me an edition of the Hardy Boys.
Yep.
The Tower Treasure was my very first book that was mine. I read that thing, and she would buy me those Hardy Boys books, and then I just love to read. And so, you know, I got to thinking about, I wanted to do a podcast, but I didn't know anything about doing a podcast.
Yeah, trust me.
I listened to them.
Right.
But I didn't know how to do anything. So one day we were at the sheriff's office, and my partner on my podcast, Alex Litz, she is the smartest person I know. She's an attorney. She's got her master's in psychology and an MBA as well. She must love school. And we were sitting in Major Freeman's office, and we were talking about, you know, we hear so many interesting stories. And wouldn't it be neat to get those out there? So I said, all right. So I started doing some research, and I bought some equipment, and we put a little studio together in my house. And our very first guest was Ken Poston. And Ken came in and talked about his book about Alvin Ridley and Virginia Ridley and that trial. And boy, it was just a hit. People loved it, and it kind of went from there. And then I went out to CrimeCon, which is a convention, a true crime convention, which I didn't even know existed.
No, yeah, I've heard of Comic-Cons, but
yeah,
I've never
well,
heard
true.
of crime.
And so Alex and I and my wife go out, and we go to Nashville. It moves from city to city. And so we were in Nashville this year, and I had no idea what I was walking into. So there's about 9,000 people, literally, at Opryland at the resort. And every television program, every podcast you can think about, anything that touched true crime was there. I got to meet more people than you can imagine, and I got to meet publishers. So McFarland Publishing, I'll give them a plug, Genius Publishing. And I said, look, I have this podcast. I've got a good audience. Can you send me some authors? And man, did they. They sent me more people and great stories. And so what I do is I'll record those authors telling the stories, about an hour long. And I gauge my show thinking about a family that's driving to Florida. And they need something to listen to for an hour. Right. And so they'll put on my show. And people contact me on my website. People contact me on different ways, and they'll give me ideas that they want to hear. They'll tell me about the shows. It's been a real learning curve for me. I'm not the most technical person in the world.
No, I've had to hire people for that. Listen, it's been a learning curve for me as well. I mean, I was telling you before we came on that I recorded an episode and the sound was bad. The camera went out.
Yep.
And we had recorded about 12 before then, hadn't had a problem. But all of a sudden, for whatever reason, that day was just a bad day. And now I've had to ask the guest to come back, and you feel bad, right? But that's just part of that learning curve.
It is.
I'm trying to figure out how to run these and do that. So how many episodes? So you're in second season?
We're in season 2. We're 7 episodes. We dropped an episode today. It's called Midwest Vice. The author is Gavin Schmidt. And, season 1 was more regional, local authors. We had stories about, Ken's, on Alvin Ridley. We had Jody Lowry from Murray County came in and talked about a murder case that she wrote about. We did an expose on the first deputy killed in Walker County, J.W. Morton, and all of that that went on. That was the last legal hanging in the state of Georgia. Happened right where the commissioner's office is now in Walker County. That's where the gallows were, and one of the Baker brothers was hanged, and his brother went to prison out in Arizona and stayed out there for a number of years. Just interesting local stories. And then we branched out a little bit in season 2, and we have talked about, goodness gracious, the I-70 serial killer that operated from Indianapolis down in Wichita into Kansas, and we've talked about this one, Midwest Vice, murder for hire in Buckhead, just as many different things, interesting stories, great authors. I have more fun doing it, and I do all my own production. I do all the editing, which takes hours of work. I'm sure that there's more efficient ways of doing it than what I do, but I like the way it ends up. And each episode's about an hour long, and really you don't hear me that much. I'm kind of guiding the authors through. Some are more vocal than others, but most of them are really good storytellers, and that's really what we do. I'm not trying to solve anything. Some of our episodes are on cases that haven't been solved. Some are on those that have gone to trial. I've had jurors. I've had archivists. I've had historians. I've had detectives. You name it. Anybody that writes a book, they'll come in and talk about their stories. Just fascinating stuff. It really is. And,
it is.
And I love all that stuff. I've been in law enforcement or investigations for 36 years. 25 with the Bureau, and then with UNUM, and then with Walker County Sheriff's Office, and now with the Judicial Circuit. I just love all this stuff. I really do. And I'll tell you this, though. I never got any satisfaction from putting someone in jail, but I sure did love the chase. I loved the chase, and I love big document cases, and a lot of my cases were big white-collar cases. I I got a lot of satisfaction sitting in a room full of documents and finding the money trail and all that. I just loved all that.
Yeah, my wife's a big, If I'd let her, she'd watch nothing but Dateline and 2020. I always tell her I could solve it for her in 5 seconds. It's either the husband or the wife most of the time, right? But yeah, I think what happens when you see a lot of those, though, there's so many hours that we don't, as citizens, and people watch it, and we get to watch it in an hour or 2 hour episode on TV, and it starts and finish, and Keith Morrison, in his great voice, gets to tell us all the ins and the outs. But as the actual person behind the scenes, I mean, how long? I mean, it takes you years sometimes.
Years, yeah. I've had cases that took 3 or 4 years. We worked on the Teresa Parker case for 2.5 years, but I had white collar cases that would last a couple of years. I had one, a couple of chiropractors, and what they were doing was they would have people come into the office, sign in as if they were receiving services, and he would pay them $75 for the first time they signed in, $25 every time they signed in after that. And if you got any family members, if you'll bring them, I'll pay you $25 for them. And then they were turning around and billing insurance companies for all kinds of services that never happened. No one ever received any services. So about $3.5 million later, we had someone that complained and we got involved. That case took me, a couple of years. It ended up going to trial. And at trial, I had 42 separate witnesses, 3,000 marked exhibits. The trial lasted almost a month. And they were both convicted in federal court, and they went to prison for, one went for 9 years and one went for 7 years. But the length of time that it took and the amount of documents that I had to go through, just thousands of patients trying to determine whether or not these services were actually rendered and what the scheme was, developed inside people, cooperating witnesses who were able to point me in the direction that I needed to go in. It was a fascinating case, but these guys, I tell you, I did a search warrant on one of them's house in August in New Orleans. Okay, in August in New Orleans in an attic.
Oh,
and in that attic were just boxes and boxes of financial documents because this chiropractor fancied himself as a financial expert. Well, he had bank accounts all up and down the East Coast, 17 different banks and 17 different accounts, and so I had to go through all of those, and so. He had squirreled away about $1.5 million, and he consolidated all that money and moved it to Las Vegas, to a bank in Las Vegas. And he had dual citizenship with Israel. His plan was he was going to get all that money out there, get on a plane at McCarran Airport, and he was going to fly to Israel. The problem was he got all that money out there, and the bank called us and said, something's not right with this. Something doesn't feel right. Now, it wasn't right. So I had great help with the U.S. Attorney's Office, Richard Wessling. Richard, I don't know where you're at these days, but he taught me how to do a trial. And we did an order to freeze that money, and he went into the bank the day he was going to make this happen, right? So he goes into the bank. He said, all right, I'm here to get my money. And they have it on camera, and they say, I'm sorry, your money's been frozen by the federal government. He pitched a fit like a 3-year-old in Toys R Us. It was unbelievable. So we were able to get that money, and we were able to seize houses and cars and all the things to get the money back to the insurance companies that paid out all of these. But I had 17 different banks. I had about 30 different insurance companies. Just a web of documents and financial documents to go through. But I'll tell you what, there was a time when I was sitting in a room and all these documents were over me and they could barely see me. And my boss came in and he said, you look as happy as a pig in mud. And I said, I am. This is what I like to do. It. Yeah, this was good. So that, agents, a lot of people see FBI agents on television and they think that it's all glamour and all that. There are times of that. There are times of boredom. There are times of sheer terror. But for the most part, it's a grind, and you just grind it through. When I came into the FBI in 1989, we had 35,000 applications, and we hired 435 agents that year. And I just was blessed how in the cow I ever got to be one. I don't know.
So what led you to even apply to the FBI?
Sure. So I played football at West Georgia for a couple of years. I came from a really good high school program at Central Gwinnett High School, go Black Knights. And I was running back and was good enough to get on with West Georgia. I played for a couple of years, but I woke up one Sunday morning and I thought, I am not going to make it to the pros because I do not have the talent to make it to the pros. But I thought, what I've always been interested in, and this is going to sound funny, I always wanted to be a rock star. I know what you're thinking. I wanted to be in the music business somehow. The only problem was I didn't have any talent. So I thought to myself, how can I get into the music business? So I said, I want to be a recording engineer. And so I changed from West Georgia to Georgia State University, and I entered into their commercial music program, and they had an engineering program, a sound engineering program. So I was in that. And I soon found out that in order to be a good engineer, you need to be able to, one, read music, and two, you need to be a really good musician. I couldn't do either. Because in the studio, and I spent some time in the studio recording artists, you need to be able to say, okay, right here, you need an oboe and 3 measures in C, and oh, by the way, you're out of tune. I couldn't do any of that.
Yeah. So
I knew I wanted to be in the business, so I switched into the business side of it. And so they had a commercial music. So I have a degree in commercial music with a minor in accounting. And I was actually in the music business. So when I graduated from high school, my senior year, I was an unpaid intern with a company called Justin Entertainment. We were a wholesale record distribution center. And what we did was we bought from all the major labels and independent labels, and then we sold to when there used to be record stores. Now, you're old enough to remember record stores, Record Bar and Music Land and all those different record stores. So we sold LPs and 45s. I'm really showing my age
Aging
here.
Ourselves here.
Bad.
Sure.
And so we sold to all these record stores, and we did several $1 million business every year. And I started out as an unpaid intern, and I left as vice president of operations. And it's just because I worked hard, and I rose up through the ranks and was very blessed and had good support in that respect. But there were things within the music business that I didn't want to get close to. There's a lot of drugs in the music business, a lot of dealings, things that I just wasn't comfortable with.
Right.
So my uncle, Mike Ellis, I don't know if you know Mike or not. Mike was sheriff in Walker County for a term. He was with Georgia State Patrol for a long time. He was kind of my hero growing up. And so I went to Mike and I said, you know what, Mike, I don't know what to do. I love music, but I don't like the business of it. And he said, Mark, I want you to seriously consider getting law enforcement. I want you to think about going in the FBI. He had been working with some agents on some things. He said, this is what you're cut out to do. I had never met an FBI agent. Didn't know really anything other than watching the FBI when I was a kid.
Exactly.
They're from Zimbalist Jr.
Yeah.
You probably watched it yourself. But I literally one day was out in the warehouse. It's about 150 degrees out there. I picked up the phone. I called the Atlanta division, and I said, I'd like an application. And they sent me an application in the mail. I filled it out, sent it back. I didn't think anything of it. A few months later, they called and said, we need you to come down and take a test. I went down and took the test. A few months later, they called back and said, hey, we need you to come down and take a physical fitness test, take a drug test, and a couple other things. And one of the tests was called a red handle test. You had to take, these are the days of revolvers, you had to take a .38 revolver. It was empty, but you had to be able to pull the trigger 40 times with both hands. Now, you don't think that's hard till you get to your non-dominant hand.
Right.
And I got to about 38 with here, and I'm thinking, I'm not going to make it. And I squeezed that thing out. I was able to get it. A few months go by, and all of a sudden one day I get a call from Charlie Gent, who was the applicant coordinator. Great guy. Loved Charlie. Charlie called up. He said, Mark, do you want to be in the FBI? I said, yes, I do. He said, can you be in Quantico next week? I said, absolutely. So I packed up my gear and I went to the FBI Academy in Quantico. And at the time it was 14 weeks. It's 21 weeks now. And it's tough. And You learned the FBI way. You learned how to walk, talk, chew bubble gum the FBI way. I loved it. It was great. Learned everything that they had to teach, learned how to do everything. And just loved it. First office was New Orleans, and then it just kind of went from there, you know. But I didn't come from a law enforcement background, but I had a business background. And I'd risen up the ranks high enough that they were able to see that maybe this kid's got something. I was 25 when I became an agent. I was a baby. I was a baby.
Definitely. And, it's one of those things. I mean, it was never something you grew up thinking, I'm going to be an FBI agent, or I want to be in law enforcement even, right? Yeah. And it just, one of those things, it just kind of fit.
It did. It did.
Wow, what a story. Because, I think there's a lot of people that have kids, or how can I wouldn't know how to, just you making that phone call. A lot of kids or people wouldn't know how to take that first step necessarily, right?
I get asked all the time of what can I do to become an FBI agent? And if you don't mind, here's what I tell them.
Sure.
Here's the thing. You've got to separate yourself from the masses. So how do we do that? One, don't have anything on your record. Nothing. Don't use drugs at all. Nothing. And get an education. In order to be an agent, you have to have a 4-year degree. Okay, but in what? A lot of them will say, well, I want to get a criminal justice degree. Okay. So let's say right now, usually we get between 70 and 80,000 applications for the agent position a year. We hire about 1,000 people.
Wow.
So it's extremely competitive. How do I separate myself from everyone else who has maybe some type of criminal history? They may have a DUI or something. They may have smoked marijuana when they were growing up, and they have a criminal justice degree. Okay, how do I separate myself from them? One, don't have anything on your record. Don't ever use drugs, and then have a different kind of degree. I had a business degree with a minor in accounting. They were looking for that. We have people with engineering degrees. We have dentists and doctors, and something that's completely different. The FBI has about 30,000 or so agents at any one time. It's while you think the FBI is worldwide, it's really not that large. But we've got agents all over the United States and internationally. I served in the United Arab Emirates. I was the FBI's representative to the UAE during the Iraq War in 2003. What a great opportunity. I mean, I was engaging with my partners in both at the U.S. Embassy, CIA, Customs, everybody, and with our partners with the government of the UAE. Loved them. Very different culture.
Oh, sure, I imagine.
But I was there by myself. So, I didn't have any support. My family couldn't go because it's considered a war zone. Just had a great time. Learned. I still have friends from those times, have pictures on my wall of me with those guys. An opportunity, a kid from Lawrenceville, Georgia, is in the UAE representing the FBI. Man, I tell you what, I've been so blessed and done things I never, ever thought I would get to do.
So when you came out, did you find yourself, and I think you've done a little bit of this, you talk about it, so you've had companies or individuals come forward and say, hey, we need help with some things. And,
absolutely.
You talked about New Orleans down there, and a lot of folks, when you talk about New Orleans, they're all like, I hear corruption down there is pretty rampant. And I don't know if it is as much today as it was back in the day.
I'm sure it is.
Yeah. So in local government especially, there's corruption. I mean, we see it all across the country. But I guess here locally, people reach out to you and say, hey, we need some investigations into this and this, and you still do that as well.
I do. It started out, funny, as sad as this would be, the first, those types of things I did were churches, where you would have someone that was embezzling from the church. I've done more of that than you can imagine. It breaks my heart.
Yeah.
But, it's fairly simple. It's a trust thing, and it's not watching over the P's and Q's. And then I would come in and I would do mainly what I would call an inspection. I would come in and say, okay, here's how it happened. Here's why it happened. Here were the weaknesses that you have in your system. And here are my recommendations for you to shore that up. I've done that for companies. I've done that for churches. I've done it for, various and sundry things. So yeah, on a fairly regular basis, I'll get requested to come in and take a look. And it's more of a, not just an investigation, but more of a forensic look to show you where your weaknesses are.
Right.
And then how you can shore those up. You know, a lot of times, things that I've seen, I had a hospital case where you had the top 5 executives of the hospital, the CFO, the CEO, the CFO, the assistant CFO, the operations manager, and the marketing manager. Those 5 top executives were all involved in an embezzlement from this hospital system. And what they were doing was they were creating false invoices. They created companies and then would invoice those companies, receive checks from those companies. But they had a closed system. Everybody that was the sign-off was involved. Had a kid that was involved in it, the assistant CFO. He had risen up through the ranks of this hospital system. And one day he figures out this scheme is going on. And he goes into his boss, the CFO, and he says, I know what you guys are doing. I figured it out. And the CFO says, have a seat. And he says, how would you like some of this? And he had to make that decision.
Yep, right then.
And he decided to get involved with them. He got about $95,000. He bought a white 1991 Acura Integra white with tan leather interior. He bought a couch, an ottoman. He put the rest in a safety deposit box. He never sat on the couch, and he felt so guilty he never drove the car. I interviewed him when he got out of prison. I put him in prison. He did 36 months in prison. He said, Mark, you saved my life, because I was on a road with these other guys that would have ended up, I don't know where. He said, and I encountered him at the gym, and I thought, I don't know how this is going to go. And he hugged my neck and he said, thank you very much. But you know, what they were doing is typical of what I see in both government and in corporations, where you have someone that is able to fly under the radar screen from an administrative standpoint, able to open up accounts or businesses and invoice that. And so the invoices come in, that's normal, they get paid, that's normal, but in reality, it's not going for any services. These guys at this hospital, they opened up a landscaping business, they opened up a marketing business, and then they stole the furniture out of the foyer and sold it back to the hospital.
Wow.
Anything they could do, about $3.2 million later.
You know, one of the movies that makes me think about Ben Affleck and The Accountant.
Yes, one of my favorite movies.
Yeah, he goes in there and he, boxes and boxes, and he figures out exactly what's going on.
Yeah.
And, but yeah, it takes so much work. But yeah, it's just crazy, right?
It is.
And I think on a national level, I'll be honest, I mean, we send all this money to Ukraine, and I think, is that really, or is that another funnel to go back door and go some other places?
Yeah.
So it happens, unfortunately, and it's our taxpayer dollars, and that's what makes us all upset.
Yeah.
Is you're misappropriating our funds that could be going to the homeless problem or the drug problem.
Yeah, and you see it not on a national level, but you see that type of activity all the way down to the local level. If you have someone that is really intent and they're on the inside, there are ways to do it. The problem is, and it's usually this way, is what gets them is greed.
Right.
If they stayed small and stayed under the radar screen, they probably get away with it for a long time, end up retiring, and then they're gone. It never works out that way. Once they get a taste of that and they're driving a nicer car and they're living in a nicer house, then they've got bills that go with it and they get greedy, and then somebody finds out. In that hospital case, it went on for almost 3 years. And the way it was found out was there was an audit done. And the auditors came in, and someone, and I don't know who it was, put a little yellow sticky on the auditor's desk and said, you need to look at the marketing department. That little yellow sticky, of which I still have today, that little yellow sticky started that entire investigation that ended up toppling those 5 guys and sending them to prison. When they were sentenced, they all stood in front of a judge, and I was there, and the judge made them go, each one of them, say what they did and how much money they got. And then he said to the top guy, the CFO, 97 months, and his knees buckled. And he went down the line to all those guys. I went and visited one of them in prison, and they were in a minimum security prison. And I went and saw the guy, and I said, well, you're looking good. You're all tan and fit. He said, yeah, I'm the tennis champion. And I said, that's not really prison. And he said, where are you going when you leave here? I said, I'm going home. He said, I'm going back in that dorm for another 7 years. And he was right.
Yeah.
But, like I said earlier, I never really got any satisfaction out of putting anyone in jail, but I sure did love the chase.
Sure. Yeah, I'd imagine so. But, there was a lot of work to go into that chase.
It was a lot of work.
That's what folks like us don't see, right? We see the end result, or we'll read the paper, we'll read the article, or, we'll watch the show, and, it's all great, and it's made to look that way, but it's all that work that we don't see, the stacks of stuff that you've got to go through and all that. And that takes somebody special to do that, because and you've got to know what you're looking for.
Yeah.
I mean, I could read over that, and, if I'm not like you, I wouldn't recognize, hey, wait a minute. It's like Ben Affleck in that example. I mean, he knew, hey, wait a minute, we've got a hole here. Where's this going? And he figures it out. But you've got to know what you're looking for.
Yeah.
So, wow. Yeah, great stories.
Thank you. Thank you.
Into that. So where would folks find your podcast? I mean, how do you?
Sure. We're on Spotify, Apple, all platforms. It's called Just One More Question. And we're out there. Just go on to Apple, put in Just One More Question. It'll pop up. Download us, hit the download or follow, and it'll rock into your podcast once a week. Our episodes come out every Tuesday. And like I said, we're in episode 7 right now. This season, I've got 14 episodes, so we're halfway done. But also, season 1 is still there. So I've got 17 episodes in season 1. Great stories, so they never go away. So if you want to go back and listen to us, hear those stories, they're there.
Yeah, especially the ones here locally. Right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
People that have grown up, or even if you haven't grown up around here, you can go back and catch up on some of the history around here, some of these great stories.
Yeah.
Because there's quite a few,
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, unfortunately. So,
season 3, I've already started putting together. For those who are local would know these stories. We're gonna do one on the Lula Lake murders. If you are familiar with Lula Lake, 1969, we had 2 young people that were attacked and killed up there. Just an interesting story. A guy goes to trial. He's acquitted, or that trial turns to a mistrial. He goes to trial again. He's acquitted. No one was ever charged or never went to jail on that one. It's a fantastic story. Locally, people know about that case. And then you've got Corpsewood. When Corpsewood down in Somerville, you had 2 gentlemen that lived down there that were robbed and murdered. Very interesting story. There's satanic stuff that's involved. It's a really interesting story. So both of those are going to be in season 3. Both of them are local, and most people, especially maybe a little bit older than we are, would definitely remember those cases. Very interesting. Love the local lore that's involved. Both of them tragedies, but a lot of investigation that went into them. Both GBI and locals were involved in both of them. So it's fascinating stories. And so for season 3, those are coming.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Well, so look them up. I know I will be.
Yeah.
Just One More Question.
Just One More Question.
So, Marc, thanks for coming today.
You're very welcome. I appreciate it, and I love telling the stories. And, what I love about your show is that it has a local community base to it, and you talk about things that are interesting to our citizens. Keep up the good work, and we appreciate it very much.
Oh, I appreciate it, and thanks for coming.
All right, thank you.
Until next time, folks, have a great week. Thank you.